What's up guys, VenomousStare back here with another first-person VOD on one of the new maps. This one's rather atrocious. It's called Invader. It invaded the map pool and fucked everything up. And today we're going to be talking about PvP. This is a PvP that I just played obviously because it's on the new map, and this game I'm deceptive and I make reads, and I thought it would be a good game to cast because I think that tricking your opponent and playing mind games with your opponent in PvP that's the matchup where mind games matter most and build orders matter most. So as you can see, I made a pylon at my ramp and made my gateway there, and then took my gas at a normal time. So obviously as soon as the gas comes up, I'm going to saturate it. And I'm going to kick it up to ×2 here until something interesting happens. And if you're wondering why it keeps flashing, it's because I'm spamming my camera hotkeys in the early game. So Cybercore immediately, as soon as my gateway finishes, as well as a second gas, and a pylon that went down in this spot. Now this is crucial. This pylon will come up big in this game. As soon as the Cybercore finishes, I make a Twilight Council on the low ground of my natural. Now this pylon can power structures on the low ground and the high ground. Oftentimes people will never expect you to place pylons on the high ground and power tech on the low ground, so you can hide things from people. Now one of the things that I did this game was intentionally place these two gateways next to this pylon, so it would look like whenever this guy scouted, he would see the two gateways, oh, okay, the pylon, and dismiss it. Because whenever your opponent's looking in your base and they see a pylon, they're probably going to assume there's a structure near it. So if you can put structures by your pylons and kind of fake out and you hide another one somewhere else, obviously that's very good. This guy's doing this typical 2 gateway, 2 adept pressure that everybody does. This build doesn't really bother me. I don't think it's particularly good. This game I'm electing, oh, there's a gooby. I'm going to kick it down back to normal. This game I'm electing to go 3-gate blink stalker. I really like this build because it's one of the funnest in the game to micro, and it allows you to be both offensive and defensive. Whenever your opponent makes an oracle or drops your main, you need to pull your workers. It's a big pain in the ass to resaturate your base, but you can't afford to lose all those workers. Oftentimes new players will just let their workers die. Don't do that. Pull your workers when you're losing them. Now my warp gate's finished, my warp gates are on, and I don't know whether or not my opponent has expanded. I'm going to push across the map and hope that he's not too far ahead of me. Now based on what he did, the 2 adept pressure into Stargate, he's either just expanded or going to all in. Notice I know he went Stargate, so I left 2 stalkers in my mineral line. You should always leave units defensively at home whenever your opponent goes Stargate. Now here, look what I'm doing. As soon as my units take damage, I try to blink them back. This means that my opponent's units refocus onto the full health stalkers, and my weak stalkers continue to do damage from the back despite being weak. Now my blink upgrade allowed me to trade with his army effectively, despite the fact that in another situation I might not have been able to, considering the Void Ray and the Sentry. So keep in mind the defensive capability of the pylon overcharge. I'm so used to playing with the overcharge on the Nexus still. It's hard for me to comprehend the amount of damage that these pylons do still. So don't blink over aggressively into pylons like that when your opponent has a mothership core. Also keep in mind sniping your opponent's mothership core is very important because of their defensive capabilities largely being based around the mothership core. Now here my opponent finally makes an immortal from his robo. which, if you don't know, immortals do massive damage to armored units, which is what stalkers are. So immortals hard counter stalkers, meaning that I will have to make lots of units to counter his immortal composition, specifically when it's supplemented by pylon overcharge. Notice this guy does exactly what I thought he would do. Try to go back in with an oracle. He manages to kill a few workers, but that's why you leave those 2 stalkers there. So in this situation, I always want to be putting pressure on my opponent because I have blink. And here I overcommit a bit. So the idea here was to try to kill the immortal. However, my opponent has enough zealots to prevent me from doing this. You can tell I took severe damage here and traded ineffectively with my opponent. You have to be careful whenever you fight immortals into stalkers like this, as it's a problem that you can run into very often, especially when you're a new player and have trouble judging the damage of an immortal. We can deduce that my opponent is still on 1 base, as there would have really been no situation to steal a base. In PvP, that's not really particularly common to steal a base. And as we can see, he's still trying to expand. This means that we can deduce that he has not taken a hidden expansion. Because if he had, he would just be producing units there. He would be sitting in his base, misleading me to believe that he was on 1 base, until eventually he garnered an advantage and attempted to push out with his superior army composition that he garnered from taking the hidden base, but he's not doing that, so who gives a shit. I just bring this stuff up so you guys can apply the knowledge to your ladder games. Whenever you micro blink stalkers, you should always keep in mind that in theory you're never really at risk against another Protoss player. You can't be force fielded off. You can pretty much always run in and blink away safely as long as you watch what you're doing. So that means you always want to try to take advantages whenever you play blink styles, meaning you run up to your opponent's army, try to snipe 1 zealot and blink away. Sure, 1 zealot might not seem like a big deal, but when you're chipping away at your opponent consistently with these blink styles and blinking away for free, it makes it very hard to get an advantage. Because remember guys, in a mirror matchup, every unit counts more than it would in a non-mirror matchup. It's just the nature of the game. Whenever you fight with the same units, obviously there's less margin for error, and there's less things you can do to differentiate yourself. Another advantage of going Twilight Council opening is Another advantage of opening Twilight Council is your ability to transition into Dark Templar. Oftentimes your opponent will skip an observer, especially when they fall behind. Now we see the Warp Prism fly into my main. Immediately I pull my main army over and watch how I watch how I micro the Blink Stalkers and avoid losing a single one to the Warp Prism. And if we look in my opponent's base, he's taken severe damage from the Dark Templar. And he's completely dead. He's fucked. He didn't make an observer. He was behind. He was making pure immortal, which he needed to win the game. And then after that, he took a risk and made a Warp Prism. After that, he needed the Warp Prism to do damage to win the game. It did absolutely none. I had 2 Stalkers ready for it and pulled my main army back. I used Blink to defend, which is a key component of using Blink because it's good for both offense and defense, as I mentioned earlier. If you learned anything, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Say, I learned this.